Get ready for a sonic expedition, a true archaeological dig into the foundations of one of the most enigmatic and ornate cathedrals in the history of rock. Many believe they know Focus, whether from the anarchic yodeling and galloping riff of Hocus Pocus or the celestial serenity of Sylvia. Allow me, however, to be the guide who reveals to you that these works, as magnificent as they are merely the frescoes on the portico. They beckon, they invite, but they conceal the vastness and the labyrinthine complexity of what lies behind. What if I told you that the true secret of Focus lies not in the notes they played, but in the philosophical and musicological tension that crackled between its creators? That they were the stage for an epic duel between conservatory order and instinctual chaos between the sacred sheet music of Bach and the profane improvisation of gypsy jazz. Today we will not just listen to Focus, we will decipher them. We will unveil what only the most dedicated scholars of progressive rock know, and I guarantee, by the end of this journey, your perception of the band and perhaps of the very nature of musical creation will be irrevocably transformed. For this expedition to continue and reach other explorers, I need your help to strengthen our community. Before we take the first step on this deep dive, I ask that you subscribe right now to the Psych Prog channel. Hit the like button so this message resonates more strongly. And, most importantly, share this video, which will be born from this text, with as many people as possible. Your participation is the map and compass for our future discoveries. To comprehend the seismic uniqueness of Focus in the musical landscape of the early 1970s, one must first understand the terrain from which they sprouted. The Netherlands in the late 1960s was a cultural cauldron. The Nederbeat scene had produced internationally successful bands like Golden Earring and Shocking Blue, but their sound largely orbited the Anglo-American psychedelic rock, beat, and blues rock. Focus emerged in this context not as an evolution, but as a mutation, an entity of another order. And this mutation was the direct result of the unstable fusion of two seemingly immiscible musical elements, its two founding titans, Thijs van Leer and Jan Akkerman. This is not the typical story of band leaders with clashing egos. It is a much deeper narrative, a collision of worlds that defines every measure of their golden era. Thijs van Leer was not a rocker who flirted with the classics. He was a classical musician who saw rock as a vast, blank canvas for his erudite ambitions. A graduate with the highest honors in flute and organ from the prestigious Amsterdam Conservatory, his mental universe was populated by fugal structures, counterpoint, and thematic development. His pantheon did not primarily include the pioneers of rock, but rather the architects of Western music. Johann Sebastian Bach, with his divine logic. Bela Bartok, with his fusion of folklore and modernist dissonance. And Claude Debussy, with his impressionistic harmonic landscapes. For Van Leer, the Hammond organ was not just an instrument for blues riffs. It was a portable sonic cathedral, a tool for erecting complex polyphonic architectures that evoked ecclesiastical grandeur. His flute, far from being a mere folkloric adornment, was treated as a concert instrument, capable of transitioning from the pastoral sweetness of a Telemann sonata to the sharp anguish of an avant-garde piece. When Van Leer howled, whistled, or unleashed his infamous yodel, it was not a gimmick for arena entertainment. It was a Dadaist act, a use of the human voice as texture, as another instrument in the orchestra, a conceptual technique borrowed as much from jazz scatting as from the sound poetry of Kurt Schwitters. He was the master of form, the composer who thought in movements, sections, and recapitulations. On the other side of this equation was Jan Akkerman, a force of nature who defies simple categorization as a rock guitarist. Akkerman was a visceral prodigy, a musician forged in the fire of intuition and experience. Before Focus, he was already a legend on the Dutch scene with the band Brainbox, where his ferocity and technique were already evident. However, the key to deciphering his genius lies not in rock, but in his deeper obsessions. Akkerman was an almost religious devotee of Django Reinhardt, the Sinti gypsy guitarist who, with only 2 functional fingers on his left hand, reinvented the guitar as a solo instrument in jazz. From Reinhardt's jazz manouche, Akkerman absorbed the stunning speed, the winding chromatic phrases that seemed to dance around the harmony, the rhythmic aggression of the right hand, la pompe, and, above all, an improvisational ethos that was dangerous, unpredictable, and fundamentally allergic to any compositional straitjacket. But there was another, equally crucial layer. Akkerman was a passionate, self-taught scholar of the lute and the music of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. This facet, heard in ethereal pieces like Le Clochard or Elspeth of Nottingham, provided the lyrical and delicate counterpoint to his electric fury. He was not a sheet music musician like Van Leer. He was a musician of perfect pitch, a master of instinct who saw composition not as a final destination, but as a starting point for cosmic exploration. The formation of focus, therefore, was not the union of musicians with a common goal, but rather the creation of a high-pressure laboratory, a sonic battlefield where the thesis, Van Leer's formal structure, was constantly challenged by the antithesis, Akkerman's improvisational anarchy. The resulting synthesis of this explosive dialectic is the music of focus. It was not a collaboration in the peaceful sense of the word. It was a debate, a musical argument waged in real time. Van Leer would present a sonata structure, and Akkerman would attack it with the fury of the blues, deconstruct it with the sophistication of jazz, and adorn it with the delicacy of an Elizabethan madrigal. Their debut album, Focus Plays Focus, or In and Out of Focus in its international version, is the fascinating logbook of the early stages of this experiment. In it, more direct pop songs with English vocals, Why Dream, Happy Nightmare, coexist, at times somewhat disjointedly, with the first manifestations of the duo's instrumental ambition. It is a crucial record, but the formula was still being calibrated. The element that would transform this latent tension into pure kinetic genius was the solidification of the rhythm section with the arrival of Pierre van der Linden on drums, and later, Bert Reuter on bass. Van der Linden was not a rock drummer. He was a jazz percussionist with an astounding polyrhythmic understanding. He didn't just keep time. He danced around it, commenting on and enriching the phrases of Van Leer and Akkerman with a rare subtlety and musicality. Reuter, in turn, was the perfect melodic anchor, a bassist whose sense of harmony and steady pulse provided the solid foundation upon which the most audacious sonic cathedrals could be erected without collapsing. With this lineup, we arrive at the turning point, the moment that defines the band and demands a paradigm shift from the listener, the creation of the album Moving Waves in 1971. It is here that the veil is torn. Let's take the most obvious example, Hocus Pocus. To the casual listener, it's a fun, energetic, and bizarre rock track. To the analyst, it's a Baroque rondo performed with the power of Marshall amps. The classic rondo form, A-B-A-C-A-D, is based on a recurring main theme, the A refrain, interspersed with contrasting episodes, B, C, D. In Hocus Pocus, Akkerman's guitar riff is the A theme, immutable and powerful. Van Leer's yodeling is episode B. The high-speed flute solo, with its classical music quotations, is episode C. The Hammond organ solo is D, Van der Linden's drum solo is E, and so on, with accordion solos and other craziness serving as additional episodes in live versions. It is the application of an 18th-century compositional principle to a hard rock context, a fusion of erudition and irreverence that borders on genius. But the true Rosetta Stone for deciphering focus is hidden on the same album, the 23-minute suite, Eruption. This is not a mere extended jam to fill the side of a vinyl record. It is one of the most ambitious conceptual pieces ever attempted by a rock band. Eruption is, in its essence, a free adaptation for a rock band of the opera Eurydice by Jacopo Peri, which premiered in 1600 and is considered one of the first operas in music history. The band not only draws inspiration, but also borrows melodic motifs from Peri's work, which narrates the Greek myth of Orpheus and his attempt to rescue his beloved Eurydice from the underworld. The suite musically follows this narrative. There are moments of fury and despair, Orpheus's descent into Hades, passages of desolate lyrical beauty, the lament, and sections of growing tension. To add a layer of almost unbelievable musicological complexity, in the middle of the suite, the band inserts a direct quote from the Cantata Profana by the 20th century Hungarian composer Béla Bartók. Consider the audacity of this. A Dutch band in 1971 weaving a piece that connects an early Italian Baroque opera with the work of one of the pillars of musical modernism, all within a progressive rock framework. This transcends entertainment. It is an act of cultural curation, a musicological thesis presented with distorted guitars and swirling organs. This search for a synthesis between the popular and the erudite reached its zenith on the 1972 double album Focus 3, their masterpiece in terms of cohesion and ambition. While the world was captivated by the whistled, contagious melody of Sylvia, which is, in itself, a study in pop perfection, a small instrumental area with a flawless ABA structure, and one of the most lyrical guitar solos ever recorded by Akkerman, initiates were poring over the monumental architecture of pieces like Anonymous, Say. This 26-minute track is the definitive testament to the band at the peak of its interactive powers. It begins with a theme by Van Leer that could have been written by a German Baroque master, which is then passed like a baton to each member of the band to develop in solos that are, in fact, variations on the theme. It is not a display of virtuosity for virtuosity's sake, but a contrapuntal conversation. Ackerman's solo is a masterclass in dynamics and phrasing, shifting from aggression to tenderness in seconds. Van Leer's electric piano solo explores modal jazz harmonies that expand the band's palette. And Pierre van der Linden's long drum solo is not filler. It is a rhythmic composition, full of nuance, melody, and structure. The entire piece is a practical exercise in thematic development, one of the most fundamental concepts in classical music, here translated into the language of rock with unparalleled eloquence. It is at this point that the band's great tension, its existential challenge, becomes most palpable and, at the same time, most productive. The rivalry between Van Leer and Akkerman, which had always been the band's engine, transformed into an open competition, a display of musical fencing on stage. This dynamic is immortalized on the album Live at the Rainbow, 1973. There, one can clearly hear Van Leer initiate a complex fugue on the organ, only to be challenged by Akkerman with a torrent of guitar notes that raises the stakes. Akkerman strums a delicate melody on his lute, and Van Leer instantly reharmonizes it with his flute. They provoked each other, pushed each other beyond their limits night after night. This conflict, which could have destroyed other bands, was the source of an almost unbearable electricity that made their shows legendary. They were rivals who needed each other to achieve greatness. It was a perilous balance, a tightrope stretched over an abyss of egos, and it was fated to break. And, here, in the midst of this in-depth analysis, allow me a brief interlude to reinforce the importance of our community. If this dissection of Focus's musical DNA is resonating with you and opening up new perspectives, imagine what else we can uncover together in future explorations. I earnestly ask that if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Psych Prog channel and activate notifications. Your engagement is what allows us to continue this work of musical archaeology, bringing to light the hidden treasures of rock. The next album, Hamburger Concerto from 1974, is perhaps the band's most explicit and deliciously ironic statement of intent. The title itself is a high-level intellectual joke, the juxtaposition of the noblest and most formal of classical musical forms, the concerto, with the most mundane and disposable of mass culture icons, the hamburger. Musically, however, the joke is executed with absolute seriousness. The title track, which occupies the entire B-side of the LP, is structured precisely like a classical concerto, with its distinct movements, starter, rare, medium, well done, etc., introduction of themes, development, and recapitulation. In an act of musicological self-awareness that borders on the sublime, the band quotes, note for note, a theme from Johannes Brahms, variations on a theme by Haydn, a pillar of German Romanticism. Again, this is not mere plagiarism or a superficial homage. It is a deliberate act of inserting themselves into the lineage of great Western music. It is Focus, with a wink, stating, "Our music, no matter how much it's played in rock arenas, belongs to this same canon of compositional seriousness." However, the cracks in the band's foundation were already evident. The departure of Pierre van der Linden, whose jazzy sensibility was so crucial to the chemistry, and the arrival of the excellent British drummer Colin Allen, formerly of Stone the Crows, altered the dynamic. Allen was a powerful musician, but his feel was more direct, more rooted in the groove of rock and blues, which subtly began to pull the band into more conventional territory, much to the growing discontent of Akkerman, who sought ever-increasing freedom and harmonic and rhythmic sophistication. The 1975 album Mother Focus documents this fracture. The influence of funk and a more polished, Americanized production is noticeable. The compositions are more concise, the structures more predictable. The complex and dangerous interplay between the two leaders gives way to more compartmentalized and safe arrangements. For Jan Akkerman, this was a betrayal of the original project. He felt that Focus was abdicating its experimental vanguard and transforming into Thijs van Leer's backing band. In 1976, during a tour, the rope finally snapped, and Akkerman left, the band he had helped define. His departure was not just the loss of a virtuoso guitarist. It was the removal of one of the two magnetic poles that generated the band's force field. Without Akkerman's wild unpredictability and intuitive genius to challenge and counterbalance Van Leer's erudite formalism, Focus lost its dialectical tension, its very reason for being. The soul of the band had dissipated. Ultimately, what almost no one knows about Focus is that their music demands a dual act of listening. It must be heard not only with the ears of a rock aficionado, but also with the mind of a music historian. They were cultural translators, alchemists operating on the border between worlds that rarely met. They took the most rigorous structures, from academia, the rondo, the fugue, the concerto, the operatic suite, and transmuted them, injecting them with the electricity, spontaneity, and visceral energy of rock and jazz. They proved unequivocally that intellectual complexity does not have to be synonymous with coldness or inaccessibility, and that popular music, in its most ambitious forms, can aspire to the depth, structure, and permanence of great art music. Their influence, though often underestimated, is profound. It echoes not only in the prog bands that followed, but also in the way heavy metal guitarists, like those in Iron Maiden, weave guitar harmonies and counterpoints, a direct heritage of the instrumental dialogue between Akkerman and Van Leer. I now invite you to a new listening session. Return to Moving Waves, Focus 3, and Hamburger Concerto. But this time, listen to them not as a collection of tracks, but as the documents of a glorious and productive conflict. Hear the architecture of Bach in Van Leer's organ lines. Hear the spirit of Django Reinhardt howling through Ackerman's Les Paul. Try to identify the rondo structure behind the madness of Hocus Pocus, and listen for the echoes of 17th century opera in eruption. You will discover that Focus was not a rock band with a few eccentric hits. It was an intellectual project of seismic ambition, disguised in jeans and long hair. They left us a challenge and a gift. The challenge to listen more deeply, to think about the music we consume, and the gift of a body of work that connects the dots between centuries of tradition and the pulsating electricity of our time. Hope this archaeological immersion into the soul of Focus has been as revealing for you as it is passionate for me to conduct. The universe of music is filled with secrets and layers like these, patiently waiting to be discovered by curious ears. To continue this expedition with us and to uncover many other mysteries in the history of rock, don't forget the most important step. Subscribe right now to the Psych Prog channel. Leave a like to amplify our message. Share this knowledge with other explorers, and most importantly, dive into the other videos we have already prepared for you. There is a whole continent of sounds and stories to be explored, and our journey is just beginning.